Welcome to the Cyber Life Podcast, where we help you learn cybersecurity best practices, give you a weekly update on the latest cybersecurity news, and share valuable career advice. Hey everyone, it's Ken. In today's episode, you're going to hear from Nabeela Bukhari. Nabeela is a senior security engineer. She's primarily focused on application security as well as mobile app security, and she does a lot of penetration testing around applications in general. And so she also holds a degree in electronics engineering. She holds a number of industry certifications. She's also a volunteer with Breaking Barriers Women in Cybersecurity, or BBWIC, which is one of the organizations that I also volunteer with. And she helps mentor women in their cybersecurity careers all over the world. So in today's episode, Nabeela is going to be sharing a little insight into mobile app pen testing, as well as like vulnerability assessments, some of the key differences between pen testing like an Android device versus an iOS device, how she keeps up to date on some of the latest trends around mobile app pen testing and some of the common vulnerabilities, etc. So really, if you're ever been interested in mobile app security, Nabeela is going to really dive into some of that today in this episode. Without further ado, let's dive right in and learn from her. So thanks again for coming on the show today, Nabeela. Before we get started, because we're going to talk about mobile app pen testing, mobile security, and essentially hacking, right? So before we get started, though, I want to do a quick disclaimer. This episode is only for educational purposes. So if you go out and you start hacking things that you don't have legal permission to do so, that falls on you, and Nabeela and or myself have zero responsibility for your actions. So as always, we always like to encourage what we call ethical hacking. So that means basically that you have legal permission in your jurisdiction or jurisdictions where the client system might be to actually go ahead and test those things. So wanted to throw that quick disclaimer out there. Without further ado, I just want to jump right in. And so Nabeela, can you just share like what is, for those out there that don't know, what is mobile application penetration testing and why is it so important for both individuals and organizations out there?
Surely. So mobile application penetration testing, also known as mobile security testing, is a process of assessing the security of a mobile application to identify and mitigate vulnerabilities and weaknesses that could be exploited by malicious or bad actors. It usually involves simulating real-world attacks on a mobile application to uncover security flaws and assess the application's overall resistance to potential threats. So the reason is because usually businesses have long been vigilant about security, and this vigilance is usually heightened when it comes to mobile apps. Nowadays, nearly every prominent brand or product offers a mobile application to enhance customer engagement. A growing number of users now rely on mobile applications, the majority of the digital activities, usually surpassing traditional desktop applications. On an estimate, users spend close to 54% of their digital media time actively engaging with mobile applications on their devices. Now, these applications often have access to extensive amounts of user data, a significant portion of which is sensitive and requires safeguarding against unauthorized access. So I believe these are the reasons why it is very important, not only from the endpoint perspective, but also from the company perspective, to focus more on mobile application security.
So can you share like some real world examples of vulnerabilities that were discovered by, like security researchers or pen testers, and maybe the impact that they potentially could have had, but they were caught in time, or if they were exploited in the wild, like what was kind of the impact of those vulnerabilities?
So talking about real world examples, there are quite a few that has happened in the past couple of years. The first one would be the case of Pokemon Go. The Android app for the mobile app game Pokemon Go was found to store user login tokens insecurely in 2016. So now this vulnerability could have allowed attackers to access users' accounts, steal virtual items, and potentially gain unauthorized access to linked Google accounts. So now the second case happened in 2015. A vulnerability was discovered in iOS applications that handled the URL schemes improperly. So now URL schemes are actually a way for applications to communicate with each other through custom URLs. Each app can register a unique URL scheme that acts as an identifier. So when a URL with that scheme is opened, the iOS system knows which app should handle. So in this case, an attacker can easily create a malicious link that, when clicked, would execute unauthorized actions in various applications. Now, this had the potential to compromise user privacy and also the security. Now, the third case I can think about is, around Super Mario Run. In 2017, a vulnerability in the iOS version of the game, Super Mario Run, allowed users to manipulate in-app purchases to unlock game content without making the required payments. Now, this specific vulnerability had the potential to cause huge amount of losses for the app's developers.
So you mentioned, essentially hacking different Android and iOS apps. So are there any key differences between pen testing an Android device versus an iOS device? And if so, like what are some of the challenges of each of those?
Yes, there are certain key differences, particularly while setting up the lab environment. It is kind of relatively easier to set an Android lab due to the availability of different free emulators out in the wild. Whereas in iOS, you need to get a handheld device for testing. Usually in iOS, we do not have any sort of emulators or free services so that people can actually test out and try to learn about it. So a lot of times security professionals tend towards Android pen testing as compared to iOS. So the second reason would be the presence of security consideration or default security considerations in iOS. In iOS, by default, Apple has a lot of restrictions present, which kind of disallows the users to install any external applications on the phone or to use certain tools that could allow reverse engineering the application. Due to which it kind of discourages many people to pursue iOS pen testing because of a lot of restrictions, and instead they pursue Android as well. And also third reason is sideloading. As we all know, in Android, it is very much possible for anyone to install any sort of applications through unknown resources. But in case of iOS, if you have a proper device and it's not possible for anyone to, install the application on iOS because of the security restrictions and imposed by the Apple manufacturer on the same. So I think these are the reasons why it is kind of difficult to, move ahead and pen test few of the platforms which we have mentioned here.
So there's a term that some people might be familiar with, or they might have just heard, called jailbreaking. Do you mind just kind of walking the audience through like what is jailbreaking?
Surely. So jailbreaking basically is a term that is used to, elevate your rights. In Android perspective, it's called as rooting. So in the normal users usually do not have such rights. Like the manufacturers will give you certain basic rights for normal operation of the phones. But this is not enough for a security professional to carry out their penetration testing or security testing, because they need to unravel the different data present inside the phone, which the normal rights will not suffice. So in order to exceed this, in order to go escalate this rights, we have to perform a certain activity called jailbreaking, which is kind of like an illegal activity, since it will devoid the warranty given by the Apple manufacturers. So when you jailbreak your phone, you are escalating your user rights from user to root, which will give you all the rights to access all the different folders inside the application, which is not present earlier on. So in order to jailbreak, you have to make sure that your devices are having a specific architecture in iOS version. And once that is set, you can easily use any sort of tools in order to do so, and can go about installing different applications and scripts to reverse engineer and also go about doing your pen test. So I think this is for iOS, and in similar case for Android, you can use different tools, but it's a bit difficult in Android, I would say, as compared to iOS.
So can you just walk the audience through like what are your typical steps when you're tasked to do some pen testing of a mobile device? Like what's kind of maybe your methodology, or like what are some of the steps that you do to from sort of start to finish to go through the pen test?
Okay, so my methodology mostly depends on the OAP's MSTG guide, which is the OG guide for mobile security. I would say it's a complete, comprehensive security guide for anyone who is interested in mobile security. So if they want to learn about it, they have to head to OAP's MSTG guide to give you a lot of test cases on how you can proceed and pen test different applications, be it Android or iOS. So talking about my steps, while testing any applications, there are two main sections. First is the static side, and the other is the dynamic side of the application. So static side, The reason why it's called static analysis is because the application is assessed while usually it's at rest, and majority of the focus lies on the code part of the application. So what usually I do is, if I have an application, I would first decompile the application using tools like APK tool, and once we get the resultants, we will open the jar file using JARX GUI, and then look at for any sort of coding flaws or any sort of vulnerabilities or any sort of hard-coded credentials present inside the code. That's how we do it. Apart from that, in order to check certain insecure data storage, we will be using tools like ADB, which is Android Debug Bridge, which acts as a bridge between your emulator and your host device. So you can connect your device and then take a terminal and then look out for different sort of data or data or sensitive information present inside the applications folder, which is pretty much which may be sensitive, which may have certain PII data or any sort of tokens, which will be helpful in figuring out the issue. Apart from that, we will also be looking at reverse engineering the application. So now always look at if the application is prone to code tampering. So by code tampering, I meant that there are chances or there are certain cases wherein the bad actors will do the following step which I did: decompiling the application, looking at the different code, and then understanding what exactly this application does. And they will be adding their own piece of code and like re-signing it back and then decompiling it back and then selling it as the original application, which is a huge risk for the company's perspective, because you are modifying the application in the name of the company and then selling it across. So this is again a huge vulnerability and something that needs to be taken as a test case, so that we can be prepared for all of these things. So so these are the static analysis test cases. But if you want to speed up the process, you can use an automated tool called Mobasif, which is a great tool which will give you a lot of results and also help you in your pen test journey. So this is the static case. And now I'll be going back to my dynamic analysis, which is kind of like a combination of the IPC and API testing. So in API testing, normally you'll be using tools like Burpsuite for majority of the analysis. So dynamic analysis basically focuses on vulnerabilities which are found during runtime analysis of the application. So here we'll be assessing the network traffic, capturing the traffic and assessing what sort of calls are being going from app to server. If there are certain vulnerabilities with respect to the app's authentication or authorization, or if there's any sort of input validation or any sort of data leakage that happens during these calls, will be assessed in this specific stage. Next is IPC, which I've mentioned, which is inter-process communication. So here in Android application, we have different sort of building blocks like activities, you have services, you have broadcast receivers. So all of these are responsible for different sort of activities in the application. So if these components are exported without any permissions, then they are basically they are being vulnerable to be called out by different scripts other than the application. And this is something that can be exploited later on. So this is also one of the test case which I use in my methodology, and also something that it's very important in testing. And apart from that, I also use tools like FRIDA and Objection, which are basically hooking tools, as we call it. At times, in many of the applications, they have a lot of restrictions. Like I mentioned earlier, we were talking about jailbreak. So it is a vulnerability. It is taken as a like a vulnerability, I would say, because usually financial applications are discouraged from being run on rooted or jailbroken devices due to its root status, and because it is more prone to be infected by malwares. So at times the application which we are testing might have a lot of restrictions, like the code might be obfuscated, or if the device will be, blocking jailbreak, or they'll be blocking root detection or any sort of traffic interception. In that case, tools like FRIDA, hooking tools like FRIDA Objection will come to your rescue. So now these tools basically will have their own scripts, Java scripts, wherein they'll be attaching these scripts while you're, using the tool, and so that you can intercept each and every call and, tamper with the specific call and understand what's the runtime analysis of the specific application, understand the working of the application, and then accordingly you can also bypass the same. I mean, for majority of the cases, thread and objection also used to bypass jailbreak detections, root detections, and also can also look at different sort of vulnerability, different data out of it as well.
So what are some of the most common vulnerabilities that you've actually been finding, just kind of in general across mobile apps?
Mm-hmm.
Like, are there any things that you keep seeing as far as vulnerabilities?
Yes, one of the most, common vulnerabilities out in the wild has to be insecure data storage. So by insecure data storage, I mean it refers to the practice of storing sensitive or private data in an unsecured or easily accessible manner. Like initially I've mentioned about connecting the device to the system and through ADB, we are actually going inside the mobile terminal and checking different sort of folders out and seeing if there's any sort of personal information like PII or sensitive tokens that can basically identify a certain person. That's something that is not encouraged by the specific user. So it's a very bad habit by developers if they are having such practice of storing or caching certain information in the device itself, because the device gets stolen, it is pretty much all of these data will be present in the device, and is something that is not a good practice. So that's one of the most common things you find in either Android or iOS applications. Second would be server-side vulnerabilities. Now, this specific case is mostly around API specific, because this usually happens when we are intercepting the traffic and looking at different sort of calls, which is going from the app to server side. So during this stage, we'll be looking at different vulnerabilities with respect to APIs like SQL injection or code injection or cross-site scripting. Now, these attacks usually involve attackers sending commands to the server to execute malicious code. The server-side controls are lacking. For instance, I would say an SQL injection attack can manipulate database content. So these are the second type of vulnerabilities which I found. Third is the web issues around web views and deep links. So before we dive deep into this, I would just give a small introduction of what web views and deep links are. So deep links basically are nothing but a distinct URL that is linked with a particular content piece within an application. So whenever you click a deep link URL, the user's device will verify if the app is already installed. So if the app opens automatically and navigates the user directly to the designated content, identifying the deep link. Usually, the issues around deep link is that at times, if the application is not having certain whitelisting in place, then it is very much easier for any sort of attacker to add his own attacker controller URL in the deep link, and then make any sort of and forward this to any sort of victim. Now this victim will click on this link, and when he clicks on this link, the victim will be redirected from the authenticated app towards the attacker control app. Now, during this transaction, there will be chances that there will be certain tokens which are which are exclusive to this user, which while going to the attacker control domain will be captured by the attacker. And there are chances, or there are a lot of possibilities that this can lead to, user account takeover. So this is one of the most critical vulnerability, or which can be escalated to a critical vulnerability. And talking about web views are actually in-app browser components for displaying interactive web content. They can be used to embed web content directly into an app's user interface for better usage. They are not exactly a browser, but they merely open pages on behalf of the application. There are certain misconfigurations around web views as well, like in case if the JavaScript is enabled, if the access to local files is enabled, if they are using certain depreciated web views. So all of these, if it's in place, then it can escalate to pretty much high vulnerability in this case. And the last vulnerability I would say is reverse engineering and checking if the application is prone to code tampering or not. Like earlier mentioned, a lot of mod applications out there that are when the application is, pretty much prone to reverse engineering, if the attacker finds the application to have no security defenses, if they can simply, decompile the application and easily figure out the entire code and make changes to it, then I think this is one of the most critical vulnerability that can cause a lot of risk to the organizations.
We talk a lot in the cybersecurity world about continuous education, right? We've got to stay up with the latest trends, things like that. So my next question, actually two questions in one. So number one part, or the first part of it, is how do you actually stay up to date and keep your skills up with the latest trends around mobile pen testing? Then the second part of the question, and you can answer them however you want. The second part is for someone brand new listening to this that's looking to get into mobile app pen testing. I know you mentioned OWASP earlier, but like, are there some courses they should take? Like, are there is a YouTube channel? Like, what are some of the resources for those people that are just starting out and wanting to get into this?
For me personally, I was pretty active on Twitter, Reddit, and Telegram. For me, these are the most, resources that are always on top of their game. And they are, if you want any sort of information, Twitter, all of the resources will help you out in that. And apart from that, there are a lot of medium blogs out there that will be helpful for the beginners, especially in terms of trying to start out into this field. You can simply Google and get all of these resources. And most importantly, I would say for any beginner in cybersecurity, Google is their best friend. Like if they master the art of Googling appropriate resources, I think they can easily get and information anytime. So I think they need to uh, master how to Google and get enough resources. I'm sure they will be getting all of this information. And apart from that, I think they can also attend different conferences. A lot of conferences that will that has a lot of speakers speak about mobile security. Like they can easily attend those conferences. They can network with like-minded individuals and also gain a lot of information on the same. So that's something which I did and talk. And I think if anyone is really beginner, I think for them the biggest resource would be OWASP MSTG, because I think they have pretty a huge guide on this specific topic, like how to pen test, and there are a lot of test cases on the same. So if anyone wants to begin, I think they should start with this specific guide out there, and then they can proceed one by one to different sort of topics. They can check Twitter, they can check different YouTube, and also a bit of courses out there. I think a lot of people out there who have done wonderful content on the same. So I think this will be helpful for the ones who are just beginning.
So as we look ahead to like the next 18 to 24 months or so, what are some of the trends in the mobile security world that you think people should be paying attention to?
So far, I think there was, there's a lot of trends going on, but there's one specific trend that has really caught my attention, and that has to be mobile DevSecOps. So mobile DevSecOps is actually an approach to, software development and delivery that integrates security practices into the entire mobile application development cycle. It combines the principles of DevOps, which is development and operations, with security to ensure that security is actually built into the mobile applications from the very beginning. So when somebody implements mobile DevSecOps, organizations can proactively identify and address security vulnerabilities and threats early on, instead of depending on the testers at the very end, reducing the risk of security breaches and ensuring overall security posture of the mobile applications. And the reason is because it is very crucial in today's mobile landscape, where the number of mobile threats are increasing day by day. It becomes very difficult to actually wait for, testing to happen at the later stages. And then, while the attacks are going on the rise, it not only hampers the man days involved in the testing, but also is pretty time consuming, to say the least. So by integrating security into the development process, I think organizations can build and deploy secure mobile applications that protect user data and also maintain the trust of their customers and clients.
Nabeela, any final thoughts or advice you want to share with the audience?
I would like to give certain advice in terms of specifically for beginners, since it is a very emerging field. I'm sure a lot of people might be interested to know about it and to get into it. So I would say that if you're learning new things, focus on practicing it. Like there are a lot of CTFs out there for mobile specific. If you're learning new things, try to implement it, try to solve different labs and keep practicing it. Because if you learn certain things, you pretty much forget the same. But if you try to practice it in vulnerable labs or sort of any sort of CTFs or any sort of applications, you can remember it by default, and that's something that will definitely be helpful for you while you pen test an application. So I think whoever is a beginner should try to keep getting their hands dirty with different sort of applications.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you're looking to secure your business better or build up your cybersecurity career, then check us out over at cyberlife.tv. That's CYBERLIFE.tv.